everyone, and welcome to Piloting the Future, a new podcast brought to you by Innovation Force and EE Online in collaboration with the Climate Champions. Here on Piloting the Future, we go deep with the leaders, innovators, and forward thinkers responsible for not just imagining where our power future is headed, but building it day by day. In each episode, we'll go beyond the headlines to hear from the industry insiders and bold, game-changing innovators. And we're going to separate all that hype from reality. So, Lee, we are back for another episode. I'm super excited about today. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you. Good morning.
Yeah, I've got a good one planned for us today. So I don't know if you remember, I should say, how could you forget? On May 4th, NERC issued a level 3 action alert regarding the sudden data center load loss. So watchdogs, I remember seeing this reported in Utility Dive, and it was all over LinkedIn that these watchdogs had flagged multiple incidents where hundreds of megawatts, including a single 500 megawatt event, unexpectedly disconnected from the grid during a minor voltage dip, and it threatened broader grid stability. We're going to be able to talk a little bit more about this in particularly, but I wanted to just ask you before we get started, what was your response? What did you think when you read this, and what were people in your circles talking about?
Well, very interestingly, I was facilitating talks with PNNL, Department of Energy, utilities all around the country, and data centers. At the time, I was hired to be a facilitator, and this was a huge topic. And what's interesting is it was a big topic before it happened. There was a lot of concern that with loads that were such a high percentage of the overall load, that if something happened, that could create a cascading event. In addition to that, there's a lot of discussion about the different load profiles of different AI behavior. Basically, there's a lot to learn that we just don't know and haven't had to plan for before. This kind of load disruption, there's an N+1 idea around generation that you have to plan for, but like a load +1 or a load -1 isn't something that utilities have had to contend with before. So this is new ground for utilities in the grid.
New ground and the new reality, you think?
Oh, it's a reality. There are utilities saying that the load in their service territory will double or even triple in the next 10 years based on requests, based on queues. And I'm not talking about generation queues or transmission queues, interconnection queues. I'm talking about load queues. So interesting.
Load queues, and then, of course, the higher power quality that we're all going to be expected to be able to run these types of AI-driven data centers, I'm supposing.
Yes, one of the things we talked about was having ramp rate guarantees from the loads, not from the utilities, but like from the loads, to make sure that if something were to happen, it wouldn't happen so quick so that the utility could adjust.
Well, everybody fasten your seatbelts because today we're going to talk about this topic. We have a great guest. It's time to learn more about the next generation of high fidelity grid data infrastructure that is going to give utilities a better way to see exactly where their capacity constraints are forming in real time before they become costly emergencies. Here with our guest, CEO and founder of PingThings, Sean Murphy.
It's great to be here today.
Sean, it's great to have you on Piloting the Future. We're going to walk through a little bit what it's like to populate Innovation Works with a new company by asking you the kind of questions that you need to get started.
And what the goal of all of this is that we're putting together a variety of use cases at Innovation Works that is accessible now to hundreds of utilities. And so what we're trying to arm you with is not just this awesome interview, but we're going to be able to take this interview and make it usable as a potential use case in Innovation Works. So when you get through and you want to try out PingThings, you're ready to go.
So let's start building that use case. First, tell us a little bit more about your company. What was the big idea that got you started?
We have a really good background story. Back in 2012, a small team out of UC Berkeley, Power Standards Lab, which was a small sensor company, came together. They built a distribution-facing PMU, a micro PMU, and they received an Open Innovation Award from ARPA-E, and they built the micro PMU and they deployed it. And so at the end of this 3-year project, they were deploying these sensors, these micro PMUs. They generate 60 or 120 measurements per second per channel. They typically capture 16, 20 channels of data. They deployed a number of the prototype devices, and the data started flowing back. And they had a, oh crap moment. Now that we have all of this time series data coming back, what do we do with it? Luckily, half of the team was from UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley has one of the premier computer science departments on the planet. And the team went and talked to the comp sci department. And basically, some of their best and brightest came up with some very interesting ideas of how to handle time series data when it's coming in fast and furious. So they imagined what happens if we had a distribution system where there wasn't 10, but there were 10,000 micro PMUs just pouring time series data into a centralized platform. How could you handle that data? How could you use that data to build new use cases? How could you basically create value from all of those measurements? Just in case anyone's wondering about the kind of the early credentials, the lab that some of these ideas came out of, the previous comp sci lab birthed a small company or a small product called Apache Spark that became Databricks. So really best minds on the planet thinking about this problem at a scale that really the industry hasn't thought about. And even today, I would argue, they're still not thinking about the problem at this type of scale, which is good news for us.
What's really interesting to me is that I worked with a company called Pice that used synchrophasers that was built into other equipment. It read the phase angles and then sent instructions 60 times a second to the inverters, telling them to adjust their P and Q basically to help support and stabilize the grid. And they were talking about just having a couple, a few of them in order to manage microgrids. It's super interesting stuff.
Again, Lee, you were ahead of your time.
Well, it's a pretty good product. I'll try to hook you up with Pice because maybe they can use more synchrophasers in their solution. Can you tell us a bit more about the key challenge that you solve for utilities?
If you look around, like time series have been around obviously forever. And when you look at time series databases, which is where a lot of the focus has been, they come out of the financial world. And in the financial world, you have stock prices that update maybe once a second. And then after finance, there is this wave of time series databases that sort of came out of general tech. And a lot of this, because there is this rampant IoT is going to change the world. Our smart thermostat is going to be talking. And so we need a new generation of time series databases for those thermostats. But again, those IoT devices, they don't take measurements very quickly. How often do you need your thermostat to measure the temperature in your house? Like once a minute, maybe. And then you look at big tech and all of their infrastructure is virtual. So they're monitoring, their measurements are coming from virtual systems where in the real world, especially in fast physics-based systems like the grid or electromechanical systems, if you can take measurements at a faster sample rate, you can see more behavior of how that very critical asset is behaving and what is happening and what might happen in the future. Whereas sampling faster for stock prices doesn't really buy you much. So there is this weird niche of higher frequency time series data that we filled before it was a thing. And then we learned that if you build a platform that can handle lots of very fast sensors, well, you can also handle all the slow ones as well. And in our purview, everything else is slow. So we inadvertently built a universal time series data platform that could handle kind of a very large range of sample rates from very slow data from the grid, such as smart meters, AMI, to even waveform and continuous point on wave, and even sensor sampling up into the megahertz regimes. And that's a very unique technology position that we sit in still today, relatively unique.
So it sounds a little bit like some awesome hammer that then you went looking for nails and you found them.
So that's a great question. In the early days, let's call pre-pandemic, in the early days of PingThings, sort of the big question was, why do you need synchrophasers? What are the use cases? That was the question on the transmission side, and especially on the distribution side, because no one really had them. So what's happened is since the early 2000s, asset manufacturers have baked phaser measurement capabilities into their smart assets. And I remember I was at a talk, keynote done by Dr. Schweitzer of SEL. And Dr. Schweitzer stood up in 2017 in front of a Washington, D.C. audience, and he said, my smart assets alone have hundreds of thousands of synchro phasers already deployed on the North American transmission system. The transmission system is covered with high frequency sensing, as well as SCADA, as well as power quality meters. It's just a wash in time series. But most of that data, a lot of it never leaves the device.
What is the risk if we don't address this challenge?
Oh, that's a great question. There's a couple risks. When I look around today and I look at the grid and I look at the challenges that people talk about, data centers are scary. They're a new load. They're growing rapidly, but then they can blink off in a millisecond because of a very minor voltage sag. And all of a sudden, you just lost a tremendous amount of load. You look at inverter-based resources and you look at the subsynchronous oscillations that inverters can cause. You look at wildfires getting initiated by the grid. All of these horsemen of the apocalypse for our current grid, they're all high frequency, very fast transient phenomenon that you can't see with SCADA. What I like to say is that the grid and the utilities, they've solved most of the problems they could see with their SCADA systems. And now all of the problems that we're seeing today, they're all high frequency problems that are invisible to SCADA. And so you need faster sensing. PMUs are one sensor, point on waves another. There's lots of ways to do this, but you need faster, higher frequency measurements to solve these problems because you can't solve what you can't see. I would argue that if you don't do anything, what's going to happen is what's happened in the past. It's a little bit of an ostrich until calamity hits. And calamity today is incredibly expensive. People die, billions and trillions of economic loss value. Or, and I think this is actually more insidious and worse, is that, oh, I have a forest fire problem. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go buy and spend a bunch of capital. I'm going to buy a bunch of sensors that look for smoke. And now I have another vertically integrated silo in my utility with yet another sensor system, and it doesn't play well with others. And now instead of having 17 data silos, I now have 18. And the ratepayer is paying for this. And what they don't understand is that all of these data silos are an incredible O&M tax that their engineers have to pay because they're dealing with all of these janky, broken tools. And that's a death by a thousand cuts.
It's a problem that is often mentioned by every utility, how many different systems they have. As a matter of fact, what they'll say is, we really like your new system, but oh my goodness, how are we possibly going to integrate that with all of our other systems? So actually, that problem stops innovation from happening in many cases.
And our goal, PingThings' goal, is to be a layer. You can call it a data layer, a data fabric, whatever buzzword. But we are a layer that handles, it means it ingests, we store, we compress, we provide query analysis on virtually any frequency, any sensor, any type of time series data that the grid consumes. So one horizontal layer, no vertical silo, no proprietary locking you down, just one hyper-fast universal time series layer that anyone else can consume and build off of. Solve the problem once, and then allow the use cases to flow.
That really is very exciting. And now I'm interested in your answer to this next question. What I'd like you to do is to get really detailed about your solution, which you kind of started doing right there, but specifically framing it, specifically how it attacks a real challenge that a utility has.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, when you look at our customers, and we're a little bit unusual because most startups raise a bunch of venture funds and they go get 12 different pilots from all these utilities. They have all these logos. And then those 25 and 50K pilots fade away. And then all of a sudden, in a couple of years, the company goes bankrupt or they have a massive down round. We have locked in a handful of customers, grown them into very large enterprise deals, and have demonstrated Jevons paradox. If we make it easy, data gets used an incredible amount. And so all of our customers, what do? They solve their own problems with their own data from their own sensors that are already deployed. No more capital. Like, you don't have to spend a bunch of capital to go install sensors. You have smart people that are hampered by terrible tools. You can now unblock those people. They can solve their own problems. They can automate those solutions, and then you can move on to the next problem. And so when people ask me about specific use cases, each utility has a giant list of things that they've tackled, right? One of our largest customers happens to serve Data Center Alley. Guess what they've been solving well before LLMs were a craze? We've been monitoring data center loads for, let's just say, a long time. It's not about specific use cases. I think use cases are really good to convince the accountant that there's ROI. It's about unblocking innovation within the utility with the talent they already have, the sensors they already have, and the data they already have.
You mentioned that paradox, and I think that was around coal, was it not? And coal becoming more efficient and people thinking they'd use less, but instead they use more?
Yes, and I love that.
Somebody recently used that as an example of why jobs wouldn't be affected by AI by saying, hey, you make it more efficient, you hire more. But I've heard a lot of companies talking about they can only do so much before it overwhelms their user community. There's only so many features they can introduce. And I was thinking how automation in the coal industry has actually yielded less jobs in the coal industry. So every efficiency doesn't necessarily expand the amount of jobs you have, while it might expand the usage.
Man, we could talk for hours about the implications of AI. I will say that I think that in many fields, AI will likely result in an explosion of opportunity and not a contraction.
If a utility wants to work with you, how can they get started? What's the first step?
That's one of the beautiful parts for us is we can be up and running on the day the contract is signed. We are a completely managed service. Data is streamed to us, and we can move at literally warp 10. One of the challenges with data is often time to value. And because we can be up and running on literally the first day of the contract, and they can have users logged in and looking at their own data, the time to value shrinks almost to zero. And so it's very easy to get started. And what we tend to see, and this is actually really exciting, if you go into a utility and you have authorization and you ask to see sensor data from, say, power quality, or you ask to see data from a synchrophaser or waveform unit, gaining access to that data can take months. There's red tape, there's cyber, there's all of these different, everything's in a silo. With us, most of the data is a query that's responds in about 50 to 100 milliseconds. So all of the data is at your fingertips. And what happens is when a utility has unfettered access to their own data, they look at it. And it was kind of, many folks may not remember a time before Google Maps, when you had the globe at your fingertips. When you first got access to Google Earth or Google Maps, what did you do? You looked around and you were like, oh, actually, I live a couple blocks from a bookstore. I didn't know that. How did I not know that? And the same thing happens with utilities. They start looking at their own data, especially the higher frequency stuff, which they tend not to have good tooling with. And virtually across the board, they realize that, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. That actually doesn't look right at all. We need to dig into this. So once you start looking at your own data, you find that in many instances, there may be assets that are already near the edge that you can preventatively address before your utility is featured in the front page of CNN, which is generally regarded as bad. It's incredible, like just looking at your data becomes a superpower. It's like a Cambrian explosion of use cases from there. It's incredible to watch happen. And we've launched it in every customer.
It's kind of a dilemma for many utilities, because if they identify all those things, which obviously sounds like the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to do, but then they have this problem of having so many projects they have to do and not enough capital to do all the projects, and they have to start prioritizing, which is already difficult for them.
But wouldn't you much rather have the information? If you think about it from a health standpoint, it's like, well, I have this hangnail, or I'm about to have a major cardiac event. Which one should I focus on?
We know the answer is yes, but I know people that say, I'm not going to the doctor because I'd rather not know.
That is true.
Not the right answer, I don't think, but that is an issue the utilities have to contend with. There's limited capital. How do they prioritize which problem, especially if they unveil new problems?
And I think what happens is when I have more complete picture, then I can prioritize more accurately, and then I can actually use my capital more efficiently, which ultimately should benefit the utility longer term.
Yes.
You can make a more prudent decision in the eyes of the regulator. I'm sure they would love to see that we were leveraging data in this efficient way. Awesome. Well, Sean, I'm going to take you into the next stage of the interview, and this is where we talk about day in the life feedback from the view of the actual user of your technology. And I can really empathize with what you were saying about having a horizontal enabling layer. You're basically giving us finally a horizontal enabling layer. It's going to unlock the power, unleash the power of data for multiple use cases. So maybe we don't need to go down the specific pain point of use case by use case because we would be here forever. But could you just talk more about what happens in the eyes of the user when they finally get access to this data? Tell us about and empathize with like how that user had no access before and now all of a sudden they have it. How does their life change and why I'm sure they're just raving about this visibility now that they didn't have before.
Our goal is really to, maybe this sounds a little bit cliche, but to really make superheroes out of these engineers. I went through an engineering degree. It's hard. You have to have a baseline, a foundational, reasonably high IQ to make it through. They have smart people. They're good people. And if you make things easy, they do more of it. They build by nature. Many professions, you can sort of categorize professions. There are some that see the world as I can grow the pie. And there are others that are zero-sum games where they're fighting to just grab a little bigger slice for themselves at the expense of someone else. And engineers build. They grow the pie. And so we need to make it easy for them to grow the pie. And what we try to do is we try to provide tooling that allows the system planner to go deep and interrogate years of data if they need to. We allow the event response team to find that event in a second and collate data from 5 different sensor types in the next minute and really get to the root cause of that event a moment after it happens, not spending days or sometimes weeks putting together data to try to synthesize a coherent narrative. They can do that almost instantly. It's incredible what happens when you get out of people's way. My favorite example, and I'll use something from outside the utility space. Go back in time, use the map example, use Google Maps. All of a sudden, the government makes all of this mapping data available for free, all of the satellite imagery, it's available. And then when Google starts offering maps for free as this easy to use interface, what do you think the use cases are at that point? Like, what's the first use case that pops into mind? It's probably navigation. It's obvious. Wow, this is a superpower. I can get from point A to point B and it can automatically plan the route. Fantastic. Back when Google Maps first came out, you know what you didn't see? You know what people didn't think about? Well, now that I have Google Maps, I'd like to build a ride sharing service. I'll call it Uber. The second and third and fourth generation use cases from data are the use cases that we can't see from where we stand now. And my excitement with utilities is we're just cranking through. Our customers are just cranking through all of the obvious use cases, which is a kind of a who's who hit list of all of the problems utilities face today. But the really exciting stuff, the stuff that changes the game, the stuff that changes the industry are those second and third generation use cases like Uber or DoorDash, or like there's so many examples of how mapping data is just built into virtually everything these days.
You are singing my song because I work with really smart engineers at utilities around the world. They are ingenious. And like you said, they may just not have access to the data through the tools that they need to be able to visualize this, reimagine this future. By creating this data layer, in my words, you're democratizing innovation, which is something that we're all about. And so I can just imagine now with this enabling layer in place, enabling these engineers now to have access at it, we will finally be able to fulfill this vision that so many of us have around the world of democratizing innovation in the hands of those superhero engineers that are closest to the problem and just haven't been able maybe to be supported in their past. And I'm thinking in particular of some of my friends that are over in Southeast Asia right now, and they're just deploying they have a data center problem, but they're also deploying so much renewable energy that this type of data that you could give them access to would just completely change the game because they are already democratizing innovation. They're putting smart students and engineers, and they just need access to the data to solve their own problems.
And that's the goal. And when you think about it, if you look at there's this fundamental core time constant in the industry. If you look at data centers or you look at IVRs, oscillations caused by IVRs have been visible in data for a very long time. A problem happens, and then it takes some amount of time, often measured in years, before enough people stand up and say this is a problem. And then the industry understands it's a problem. And then vendors hear that, oh, wait a minute, this is a problem. We need to build a solution. Now they've built a solution, and 5 to 10 years have passed. That time constant does not work for the contemporary grid. And so the only way to solve that problem, and that is a foundational problem, this is a species level problem, is, well, what do? You put the data in the hands of the people who are running the grid so that they can do it. And it's not just real-time data. There is a fixation of what happened in this moment. It's putting all of the history, all of the context, all of it in a single place that's easily accessible. And that's how you take that time constant from 5 to 10 years for every new problem, and you shrink it down to days, weeks, months.
I have one more question for you, but before we get to that, sometimes in this section, I like to say that we're really breaking down the BS because where are the barriers? Is this a bunch of BS? How do we break it down so that we can move faster? I'm going to go on a soapbox for a minute. I might say something controversial. What is frustrating me, I am a student of use cases. So my AI goes out and crawls all the obscure databases out there looking for, well, what are the utilities really doing? And the only way that we can find out what they're really doing is by looking at what they file, what's publicly available in all these obscure databases. And you do get a lot of really interesting insights. And so what we try to do is say, we know that there's 7,000 challenges out there that everybody's trying to solve. When you boil it down, there's probably X number of use cases. But for any of these use cases really to drive industry change, you have to have evidence underneath of that. And so the evidence that we try to capture is, well, who else is looking at the same problem? And what case studies do we have out there that somebody tried this and had success? I am finally looking at my first real view of a lot of use cases coming in from a lot of crawling I've been doing. And sadly, Sean and Lee, what I'm seeing is that these use cases are old news. Like, this was the gold that everybody was asking me for. And I'm like, wait, but this is old news. These are old case studies. We're talking about new stuff. We need non-wires alternatives. We need data-driven insights. We need these next generation applications Sean's talking about. And so I don't know where you guys, if you agree with me or not on this, but I had to say it here because I feel, Sean, what you're saying is you're leaning into the future and telling us where we need to go. And I've been trying to build up all this evidence to democratize innovation. And I feel like it's just telling us more of what we already are seeing in the past that we can't repeat.
We opened up our discussion, Kim, today by talking about data centers and the loss of data centers taking down a grid potentially, and it certainly could. I remember the panic. I'm saying panic that utilities had, number one, when solar started growing. They said we can't have a high percentage of solar on the distribution grid. It won't work. It's too intermittent. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. But that didn't stop it from happening. They had to find solutions to those problems. They're still searching for those solutions, although they have many. Then we had EVs. And I had a director at a utility tell me, no, we can't allow EVs because we won't be able to charge them. We can't take that kind of load. It's like a whole house popping up every time somebody buys a vehicle. And of course, EVs, maybe we want them to take off even more, but there's a lot of areas where we have a lot of EVs. Look at Norway. And they're dealing with it, right? There are solutions to it. Well, let me tell you, this data center growth, it's going to make those look easy. It's going to make those look easy. And then combining data with intermittent renewable energy, even more interesting, trying to solve those problems. Yeah, we can't look at old problems. We got new ones coming up.
So, Sean, my last question before we move to our lightning round for you is, having a front seat to all of this, what has surprised you the most?
Man, that's a great question. I'll give you an example, and it kind of ties back to your use cases. I was at a conference, and I remember there was an engineer, gentleman was giving a talk, and they were talking about smart meters. He stood up, and one of his slides was, we rolled out smart meters. Why did we do this? It's so we didn't have to roll a truck to read a meter. And it's just billing. It's a cash register. But then what happens, we actually got a hold of the data, which apparently is relatively rare AMI data, which we look at as sort of tiny, adorable even.
Hey, it is a sensor on the side of the house for.
It is. And he went to the next slide and he said, here are the 47 other use cases for the data. And if you go to the literature, there are hundreds of published papers. It's not a use case problem. It's the mentality of, I have to solve a problem. It's this tiny little problem. I'm going to buy a hyper specialized tool to solve this one problem. And then I'm going to wait and react to the next problem that comes up. What I think the grid of today and the future demands is you can't react. You have to understand what's happening and you have to see what's happening and then you have to proactively respond. And the only way you can do that in a capital efficient fashion is with data. In this day and age of AI, it's amazing that we're still having those conversations.
When you said Europe a second ago, I had the good fortune. I started my career working for a smart metering company, but a lot of our meters were sold in Europe. And we worked with some of the leaders. They love data. I can't remember, but I want to say that we provided over 230 or 250 types of data sources, sets. And from there, you could do a lot with that. And it was just eye-opening to me. I was someone in the Silicon Valley this was my first gig in the energy space, was the smart metering company. And I'm like, how are we not making more value out of this data because we're capturing 250 types of data right at that meter. And Europe was leading the charge, was showing, here's all the amazing things you could do with that. Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. And I'm excited for this episode and I'm excited for what people are going to say when they listen to this, because I think this is timely. We have to push this use of data and get this enabling data layer in.
My hope is that if nothing else, when you think about this whole AI revolution that's causing the data center boom, AI is built on what? It's built on data. Right now, there are many utilities where they don't have last year's data. They deleted it. It's gone. So they have measurements that actively define behavior of the critical infrastructure that is literally keeping society and the species alive, and they delete it. Like, could you imagine if Amazon, after a month, they just purged all of your purchase history? Is storage that expensive? Spoiler, it's not. It's really, there's a mentality and culture shift that has to happen. And I hope that if for all of these utilities that want to embrace and adopt AI, particularly physical AI, got to have a very different policy with your sensor data.
I think they didn't see necessarily that there'd be a use for it, or that it was becoming very expensive, because once you have one copy of the data, then every time you get new disks that you invest in new storage, you duplicate it and you end up having 10 copies, and it becomes something the utility looks at as, hey, we're not getting value for this. I'm not saying that they should, I don't think they should have deleted it, but they're trying to make business decisions and they see data growing like crazy and they just do anything they can to maybe stop it.
Yeah, data is not a cost center. Data is an asset, but it's only an asset if you have the tools to exploit it, and they don't.
Another thing, I'm not sure I should open this box, but another reason a lot of times utilities don't argue for projects based on all those amazing use cases is then they're held accountable. If they say they want to spend $1 billion because they're going to save $2 billion on all these use cases, then they have to give back that $2 billion at the end of the project. And if they just say, hey, we'll get rid of meter readers, and they keep those other use cases kind of private, hoping they can get it, then they only have to succeed in that one area in the eyes of the regulators. So it's a little bit of a different business model that kind of unfortunately confuses what they can talk about.
Great idea, though. All right, Lee, are you ready for the rapid fire predictions?
Yeah, let's start the hot seat rapid
We're
fire.
already in the hot seat. Now it's getting hotter.
Let's try to keep these to 30 seconds. And Kim, why don't you take a shot at them also after Sean does, and maybe I'll throw in my opinion. In 5 years, what's the biggest challenge to the grid?
No one knows. That's the whole thesis. You don't know, and that's why you need data. It's that simple.
That's a great answer.
I was going to say, I can't even follow that up. That was perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the easy answer that we've said, and I still think it's going to be quite a challenge, are data centers. But we don't know what about the data centers. We think we do. We have some ideas, but I think it's growing. As they get built, we say, oh, we didn't expect that. So yeah, we don't know. How about what's going to be the biggest challenge specifically for data and power quality?
Oh, that's an easy one. God, I hope data is not a challenge in 5 years. Just adopt my platform, my company's platform. It's solved. It's nice and easy, guys. It's a layup.
I love that. Although I still think it's going to be a challenge.
Probably what Sean was talking about as far as being able to build those business cases. So at the end of the day, everything we're talking, we can geek out on this all day long, but at the end of the day, what we really need is smart business cases and to unlock, like Lee, like you've been talking about as well, so that we can get the regulators behind what we're doing and, the right things capitalized and seeing data as an asset for the business model to work.
And if Sean is wrong, my answer is change. It's that evil word change, which is hard for everybody, not just in the utility industry, but because of the safety concerns and the reliability concerns, and the security concerns, change is very difficult for utilities. And that could be, even if there's a solution, that could be the biggest challenge. And how about a myth about grid edge data, Sean, that you'd like to bust?
Oh man, I've heard it's almost like the industry gets $1 every time they say the word grid edge. If grid edge were a drinking game, everyone would be dead from liver poisoning. Like I hear that term all the
How
time.
about just if I had a nickel for every time?
I'm biased. We operate a centralized platform. Our belief is that when you look at the edge versus centralization, oftentimes they're put in almost like combatants. It's one versus the other. And we look at this as they are solving different problems. It's like the human body. If I, with my finger, touch a hot pot on an oven, then there is a local actuator that's an edge sensor, an actuator that pulls my hand away. But that information, that sensor data flows all the way up into my brain, and my brain learns, idiot, don't touch hot pots. Edge is only edge for two reasons. You either have limited bandwidth and you can't get the data back. And just for the record, I could be a penguin on the North Pole and I can stream 4K Netflix today for $100 a month. So bandwidth is not a problem. So the edge justification is really, I have to actuate in milliseconds, but everything else you should be centralizing data. Otherwise, you can't learn.
For early days of smart meter, we had private networks that didn't allow a lot of data. And so getting the data back was a big problem, and they had to get it back in pieces, and they couldn't get back all the data that those smart meters were sensing. But they've got to overcome that because there's just too much great data there. And you're right. We're watching movies in real time. We're watching sporting events in real time.
I will say that my company, we offer state-of-the-art time series compression to help them get more of the data back to a centralized platform if they so choose. So there are ways to do this, even with limited bandwidth.
That's good to hear. And I can think of a lot of companies out there that should be partnering with you then, Sean, because I've seen a lot of these business cases and what it was going to cost to get the data through the cellular networks, et cetera, back. I love that you're just enabling every barrier that you can think of when it comes to data. If you found this conversation helpful or inspiring, share your own bold prediction with us on LinkedIn and tag Innovation Force, Lee or myself. We would love to hear from you, what you thought about this episode, and share someone or a company that you think is shaping our new energy future. We found out about PingThings through LinkedIn, so that was a great example of how fast we can learn about somebody through our community and get them on the show. We want to see you in the hot seat, just like Sean was today. Also, if you really love to hear what PingThings is all about, please be sure to check out their website, www.pingthings.io. It's a really great website. You're going to learn a lot. And of course, we have them in the Innovation Works hangar. So we are so excited to be working with them. And then we'll be working with them in our Grid Acceleration Collaborative with AIC, focusing on some of these great case study learnings. So get tackling these top 10 grid modernization challenges with us. And be sure to check out innovationforce.io if you have any questions about or want to join our Grid Modernization Collaborative with AIC.
And change is accelerating oh so fast. Innovate, innovate, innovate.